Hey everybody, welcome to Upstairs to the Right Music channel. This is Mike McWilliams, your host. Late last year I traded a gold coin for 4 vintage speakers on the Guitarologist Brad's channel. He was kind enough to make that swap with me. Now a lot of people were asking themselves why would you trade a gold coin for 4 vintage speakers? One guy wrote, I think, like, who does that? Well, this guy right here, I do that. And I have my reason behind doing it. As a producer, as an engineer, as a guitar player, I am always constantly spending my life chasing tone, whether I'm chasing the tone of a piano sound, whether I'm chasing the tone of a drum sound, whether I'm chasing the tone of a mandolin sound, I've used. So I'm always constantly chasing tone, and my tone chase for guitar is pretty bad. It really goes down what I call the rabbit hole of gas. Gas means gear acquisition syndrome. So when you're chasing tone, like I do in my profession, there are no links that you won't go to achieve the sound that you're looking for. Now, as I've preached on this channel before, I'm really a big stickler in terms of doing things to get a good sound, but to do it on a budget. I don't feel as though you all the time need to run out there and buy the latest, hottest, most expensive thing. Usually, you can get by what I call the 95% is good enough, close enough. But there are some things that I feel that you cannot scrimp on. You got to go for that 100%. And the exchange that I made with Brad falls into that category. Now, there are a lot of guitarists who have influenced me over the years. Of course, there's Jimmy Page. As you can see from some of my early videos that I have an EP3, a vintage EP3, Jimmy Page used that as a preamp, not just in the studio but also on his live shows. The preamp sound of a EP3 is quite something to behold, or something to hear. Now, of course, Echoplex has come out. Was it Dunlop has bought that company? So Dunlop has reissued the Echoplex in pedal form, and I own that as well. But I'll tell you that there is no comparison between that and the original thing. So I had to have the original thing. Another influential guitar player would be Eddie Van Halen and Tom Schultz. Both of these guys I study in terms of their signal chain. I'm fascinated that Van Halen, for example, in his signal chain when he was recording the first Van Halen album, Van Halen 1, he was running from his guitar into a EQ pedal, then straight into the amp, and then he was using actually the backside of the amp, the effects loop, to run all the other various things that he ran, including an EP3, by the way, as well. Tom Schultz is famous for the sound of that first Boston album. He went out and created his own company and created that soloist, so that with that little soloist box, you could also get that same sound that he had. Those are actually hard to find these days. I remember when I was a kid, they were all over the place. West LA Music in LA, which was the shop that I went to, it's not there anymore, unfortunately. But that's where I bought all my stuff when I was a teenager into my young adult. And boy, they had those all around. I wish I had bought one, because now I'm looking for one. That's certainly a sound that I like. Also Santana and Prince, for their tone, or 2 guitars for their tone. Not so much what they play, because they've played a lot of different guitars. We've talked about that in terms of Prince Rogers. Santana also, he's played a bunch of different guitars. So it's not really their guitar or their rigs, it's just their overall tone that I like the sweetness of their tone. Then you get into guys like Paul Kossoff from Free. Now, Paul Kossoff is probably the reason why I picked up on wanting to get a Les Paul. Paul Kossoff's tone, man, was just killer. This guy went from his Les Paul into a stack of Marshalls. Just look at the Live at Isle of Wight if you want to check that out, and got this awesome tone. Another influence on me, I'm not a big Kiss fan at all. I'm not a big fan of their music, but I am a big fan of Ace Frehley's guitar tone. And he achieved that from the DiMaggio pickups that he used. As a matter of fact, he was one of the first guys that used DiMaggio's, the DiMaggio PAF and the Super Distortion. He mostly just played the Super Distortion in his bridge position, and that's how he achieved that classic Kiss tone that you can hear on the first Kiss album, the Kiss Live album. That wasn't exactly live. It was actually recorded, parts of it were recorded in the studio by Kramer, Jim Kramer, Hendrix producer. These are some of the tones from different guitar players that influenced me over the years and got me to the point where I started seeking my own tone. Now, it can't be understated how big of a role vintage Celestion speakers with their pulsonic cones played a role in vintage rock. You really, if you're going for that vintage rock sound, there's really no way that you're going to be able to achieve that. I don't care if you get yourself a burst, which certainly will help. But unless you've got the $300,000 to $400,000 to spend to get yourself a vintage burst, that ain't happening. So you can go out and you get yourself one of the various reissues, the R9s, the R8s, and try to achieve that tone by plugging into a Marshall stack. But in my opinion, unless you've got those Celestion greenbacks in it, the G12Ms with the pulsonic cones, circa late 60s up until around 1972 or so, 73, where they still had the pulsonic cones in them. You're just not going to be there. You're pissing in the wind. You're not going to get that tone. As a matter of fact, it's really funny that in the signal chain for guitarists, one of the most overlooked things is your speakers, which it really determines what comes out of the amp. Like I said, you can get yourself an R9, you get yourself a brand new Marshall stack. You could spend thousands of dollars on pedals. You can do all that stuff and try to achieve the tone of any of those guys that I just mentioned, especially Kossoff and Page. But to tell you the truth, you're not going to get it. You're not going to get it unless you have greenbacks, and that's just the end of the day. I'm putting myself out there officially saying that you are not going to achieve a vintage tone without having greenbacks. Now, certainly, there are variations on that tone. So I guess I can't say just greenbacks. But primarily in the rock world, that was the driving sound through the late 60s to the 70s. And so if you're trying to get that 60s, 70s rock tone, you're not going to achieve it without vintage speakers. It's just not going to happen. Now, what I did was I decided to myself, I'm going to try to obtain some vintage speakers and do a little bit of a twist on it. Vintage speakers are great. Vintage amps are dicey because of a lot of different reasons. One of them primarily being that once you change one thing in a vintage speaker, change the tubes out, any number of things that you can do, as time goes on and you have to make those changes because they wear out, you're going to change the fundamental tone of that particular amp. And also the wiring can get dicey. Plenty of examples on YouTube of what I'm talking about. So what I thought to myself is, why don't I find a modern amp that has a vintage tone to it and put a true vintage speaker in it and see where I'm at with that. So this is the Laney Club 12. These are voiced very, very similar. It's somewhere between a Marshall and a Hi-Watt. It's a British voicing in any case. So it has the tone that I was looking for. It is a modern speaker. It is a tube speaker. Actually very similar to the Wongs or the Wangs, however you want to pronounce it, amp head that I've been recently showing on Upstairs Garage Music. So it's got the same tube. Turn around and take a look here. So if you take a look at the back of this Laney 12R, you see that I have put one of those vintage Celestian greenbacks back in here. I actually took the stock Laney speaker out and replaced it with the vintage greenback. I have to tell you, these are really fizzy, cheap, low quality speakers. They are the Laney H8 speakers. You can get them for about 25 bucks. I really can't tell you how I dislike the sound of this speaker. Great amp, really shitty speaker. One of those reasons again was for Laney to keep their costs down. Fortunately, in the build of this, they didn't cut any corners, so that's a plus. They did have to, however, cut their corners in terms of speakers that they put in there, but no worries. Again, like I said, I was able to put one of those vintage greenbacks in the back of this amp, so there it is. So that's one of the greenbacks that I got from Brad. Had it completely checked out, and it's just an awesome sounding speaker. It really, really makes a difference. In a little bit, I'll show you how that sounds. Now, I received the speakers from Brad. When I went to LA, I went to go pick them up. I took them to a shop out in Burbank that specializes in refurbishing and fixing up vintage speakers. Great guys out there. And they took a look at the speakers and discovered that actually they were all in great condition. Unfortunately, 2 of them had been reconed, of the 4. They had been reconed. A good reconing job, excellent speakers, but they didn't. They no longer had the original Posonic cones in them. However, 2 of them did. So those 2 speakers I carefully packed up, put in a flight case, and brought it back from Los Angeles here to Singapore. I checked it in, which was probably a major mistake, because when I got back here to Singapore and opened up the flight case, TSA had put their hands through one of the cones. A cone that hadn't been touched, was in perfect condition since 1972. And those fine folks at the TSA decided that I didn't need to have 2 perfectly working vintage Celestian speakers, that I only needed 1. So, yeah, so what happened was, and then of course, you know, you open up the flight case and there's a little TSA, we opened up, you know, your shit, and decided to put our hands through one of your cones. So the cone had been completely ripped all the way from here to here. Somebody, I guess they put their hand through it, whatever. Really, really, really pissed me off. Can't say enough warm things about the TSA. I immediately sent it back to the speaker shop in Burbank. I shipped it back to the States, and actually they got back to me and assured me that they can completely repair it. It'll have no issues, and so I'm kind of happy about that. So let's take my 96 Les Paul Classic. I will use the bridge pickup, which is a vintage DiMarzio 77 PAF. I will run it into my 1973 EP3. From the EP3, we'll just go directly here into the Club 12R with the vintage greenback in it, and we'll see what kind of tones we got. All right, let's do it.
Show your support by subscribing and hitting the